Great, welcome. Thank you for joining us for this special presentation and reception, Drivers of the Biodiversity Crisis, Colorado in Focus. I'm Dr. Lindsay Rosa. I'm the Vice President of Conservation Research and Innovation with Defenders of Wildlife, and this evening I also play the role of moderator and host. Many of you are familiar with the current situation that we face. We are witnessing a rate of biodiversity loss that is unprecedented in human history. There are 5 factors that are driving biodiversity to the brink: climate change, invasive species, habitat loss, overexploitation of species, and pollution. It's a global problem, and the United States is far from immune. Here in Colorado, there's a significant number of species that are impacted and threatened by these 5, with climate change and habitat loss being the particular 2 at the top. And I hear it over again. Lindsay, I'm so tired of unprecedented times, right? Given recent events, couldn't we just maybe go for one of those business as usual scenarios that you talk about? But no, we cannot settle. In fact, unprecedented times call for new ways forward. Thankfully, there are people leading the way with bold actions to help us turn the tide on biodiversity loss. They are shaping new policies, advancing the best available science to drive decision-making, and organizing us to speak out, and more. We'll get to hear from some of those people today. We have an incredible lineup of panelists. I'm really excited. And they'll speak to the 5 drivers on biodiversity loss and the impact on Colorado's wildlife and ecosystems, and importantly, speak to efforts currently underway to combat this crisis in the field and in the state legislature. Before we get started, though, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators and Rocky Mountain Wild, for helping us in planning and promoting this symposium. Of course, I'd like to also thank our panelists for joining us this evening and sharing their experience and expertise with us. And of course, thank you all for coming out and attending. There will be a question and answer period after all of the talks, so if you could please leave your questions until the end, after which I hope you'll join us for some more reception. With that, I will kick us off with this. Globally, 1 million species at risk of extinction in the coming decades. This may not be a new headline to you. It's been around a while, over 5 years now. But there may be some more that you have yet to see. In the US, 40% of our plant and animal species face the same fate. And here are some more scary statistics for the US and North America more generally. I say scary because they kind of are when you start to think about how much is tied to these species, their interactions with one another and with the rest of the world, our health and well-being, our economies and livelihoods. When we talk about the decline of bee populations, we're not just talking about walking out into a field and no longer hearing the buzzing of bees, right? We're also talking about the native plants that depend on those bees. We're talking about the native local honey they produce, the crops they pollinate, the jobs and ecosystems that depend on them, and more. There's no more common interest and more widely shared among us than healthy natural systems and the thriving biodiversity that serve at its foundation. So this big global headline came from this report. Again, this came out in 2019, and this served as a synthesis, a comprehensive report of the many scientific papers, the many experiences and expertise that was out there, all relevant to decision makers worldwide. Other than the landmark 1 million species statistic, it also highlighted 5 main drivers to global biodiversity loss. And those are land and sea use change, invasive species, overexploitation, pollution, and climate change. Thanks to science, we know some of the challenges that biodiversity faces, and yet we still have some important questions that go unanswered. Many of them because when you start to take that report and drill down to the places where we live and the places where we act, we don't know quite as much. We don't have that same report for here in the US, that comprehensive understanding of the status and trends of biodiversity. We have those scary stats, that's one indicator. And of course we have our experiences, the pandemics, the climbing temperatures, right? All of those things that are indicative of nature collapse. At Defenders of Wildlife, our Center for Conservation Innovation is working to help fill some of these knowledge gaps. And for that purpose, we developed and released a report based on some of the best available data for the lower 48. That's based on these 5 drivers and trying to understand the potential impacts on our local ecosystems and species. Of course, I want to give a shout out to the people who are behind this report, mainly Dr. Laura Nunez and Talia Niederman. They, along with the team, did an analysis focusing on those species that are in greater need of more immediate conservation efforts, those species that are on the brink. And that includes many of our species that are listed as threatened or endangered under the Endangered Species Act. There are some, certainly here in Colorado. You probably know the Canada lynx, the Gunnison sage grouse, the Pawnee montane skipper, and there are at least 35 others that fall on that list. So the team of scientists gathered available spatial data, or maps, on those 5 main drivers of biodiversity loss in the lower 48 each, having their own unique spatial pattern, and combined them for this overall look at threat exposure for the US. And if you take a look, you'll see there's no place in the United States that is unaffected by the 5 drivers of biodiversity loss. The areas in red have higher risk, and certainly there are some pockets there, some of which are in Colorado. And in fact, on average, compared to the rest of the states here, Colorado is likely to see some of the more drastic changes in climate and habitat by the end of the century. More intense changes in precipitation and in temperature, of course, around here means more frequent summer droughts, reduction in spring snowpack, increased insect outbreaks and wildfire risk, and more, all of which create concern for both nature and people. So what we wanted to do next was kind of compare this with where those imperiled species are. Where are the places of greatest biodiversity importance? So this one gets a little bit more complicated. But now that map that we were just looking at is just in these shades of mustard, if you will, with the deeper mustard color being greater chance of that greater threat intensity, and then this imperiled biodiversity being in purples, so deeper purples being more imperiled species there. And so where those kind of converge in this Merlot color, I guess, if you will, those are the areas where we have, right, pretty high chance probabilities of this high threat risk and really important areas for biodiversity that are going to face those. If you narrow it even further, if we just had a map of just those areas that are of the highest biodiversity importance for the US, half of those fall into that high threat category. So those drivers that are most prominent in Colorado, habitat loss and climate change, are also at the top of the list in terms of the number of imperiled species that they threaten nationally. Over 12,000 species that find themselves on the threatened and endangered species lists got there in part due to habitat loss and degradation. And now with advances in our understanding of climate change impacts and the sensitivities of species to those climate changes, our report was now the first to show that climate change has actually surpassed habitat loss, only by a little bit, but it's up there as the top threat for imperiled species in the US. So where do we go from here? One theme that underlies the 5 drivers of global biodiversity loss is that humans are the driving force, so the driver wheel is in our hands. We have the opportunity to take action to mitigate our impact and help the global community stem a global crisis. And the science is clear that we need to act now, and we have greater chance when we do it together. We need strong conservation, science, and policy tools to tackle species extinctions, and we need a strong commitment to tackling the biodiversity crisis that is national in scope, but can be local in leadership. This includes efforts to inform, develop, implement comprehensive policy action to stem leading drivers of biodiversity loss and better coordinate communities and governments to that end. So you can find out some more about national efforts like this at 1millionspecies.com, but more importantly, local conservation efforts and lessons learned can and should be shared across, shared with people working across sectors and scales. So we're here today to continue an important series of conversations. This is the 4th in our series here in Colorado, to identify some of the much needed innovative conservation solutions. I hope you join me in my excitement to hear more about what's happening in Colorado to help turn the tide on biodiversity loss. And with that, I am excited to introduce our first panelist. James Radlin Leaf, Sr. is a member of the Sicangu Lakota Nation and is a visionary leader and advocate for indigenous knowledge systems, climate resilience, and community-driven solutions. With over 25 years of experience, he specializes in fostering partnerships between indigenous communities and institutions in government, academia, and the private sector. His work is deeply rooted in the Lakota value of Wolakota, centered on peace, respect, and balance, guiding his approach to integrating traditional ecological knowledge with contemporary science and policy. James is the founder of Wolakota Lab LLC, a Lakota-owned consultancy dedicated to advancing indigenous-centered solutions in environmental stewardship, education, and innovation. The lab serves as a bridge connecting indigenous knowledge systems with cutting-edge research to address global challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and sustainable development. Wolakota Lab collaborates with diverse partners, including the National Science Foundation, NASA, NOAA, and academic institutions, to co-create projects that promote cultural preservation, environmental sustainability, and equitable STEM opportunities for Indigenous peoples. Through Wolakota Lab, James has become a nationally recognized advocate for Indigenous data sovereignty, traditional knowledge inclusion, and cross-cultural understanding. His work empowers Indigenous communities to lead in creating innovative, culturally relevant, and sustainable solutions for the future. James, thank you so much for being with us.
How midakiapi, chante washte na pechus apollo, James Radlin Leaf, himachiapi, Sicangu Lakota yate himataha. Good evening, I greet you today from my heart with a handshake. I am known as James Radlin Leaf, and I'm a member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe. And thank you, Lindsay, and your team for welcoming me to this this important gathering. And again, I apologize for not being there in person, but through the wonders of technology, I can come to you today through Zoom. I'm going to begin my remarks because what I hear and what I see is happening in our country today. I'm going to start with this. Tribes are classified. American Indian tribes are classified as political entities because of their long-standing history as sovereign nations that existed before the United States was formed. The U.S. Supreme Court has consistently recognized that measures such as tribal jurisdictions are justified because they are directly linked to congressional special obligations towards tribes. These decisions underscore the classifications as political rather than racial. The federal government entered into agreements with tribes providing services in exchange for land and rights, which establish unique trust responsibility with American Indian tribes, including Alaska Natives, through treaties, statutes, and historical relationships. This distinctive historical relationship and trust relationship has led the federal government to accept the highest moral responsibilities towards American Indian tribes. Let us reaffirm this unique treatment, programs, and services to American Indian tribes based on their political and legal status, which is recognized in the U.S. Constitution, treaties, and many federal laws and policies. I begin my remarks tonight with that statement. The reality of the situation in working with tribal nations and the federal government is exactly that. We are in very difficult times. And so I wanted to begin as recognition and reaffirming who we are as tribal nations. So thus I put my title, Centering Tribal Nations and Biodiversity Solutions. And so today I wanted to start with that and also share with you some of the things that I'm involved in, both as a consultant and also as a research associate and fellow at the University of Colorado Boulder. The topics I want to share with you is beginning with the biodiversity and climate assessment. So about a year ago, I was asked to serve as a governing member of this Canadian, America, and Mexico assessment. And to me, it was very important when considering this kind of work, where we bring together science and all the things that we know today. But more importantly, in my view, is bringing together the traditional knowledge. So I was able to serve as a what they call a governing committee member. And in that work, we certainly elevated and advanced the importance of working with tribal nations. And in that work, we were able to bring together indigenous scholars, advisors, elders, and knowledge holders to help us inform not only the process and methodology for doing an assessment like this, but also what could be the outcomes and what could be the impacts. So that's important. And I think this is the first time in my understanding in the work 25 years now of this kind of work where stronger and stronger indigenous voices are part of that national assessment. So that's important. And I do think that in this work, we recognize the importance of indigenous people, right, as guardians of biodiversity. You've heard that before about indigenous lands contain 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity, and yet we're just a small population. You've heard that the role of traditional knowledge, what is it, and why does it matter, and how TEK, as they say it, can complement Western science in terms of developing solutions. You might have heard the idea of sustainable land management practices and how we bring our culture and our customs in terms of taking care of the land. We promoted climate change resilience because we are on the front lines of climate change, both in the Arctic and Amazon and Pacific Islands. And our adaptive strategies have been, I think, in leadership when it comes to those kind of ideas, both in supporting biodiversity and cultural realization. There are ethical and moral considerations when we work with indigenous people and how we protect these places that are of cultural significance to our people. And also the role of bison restoration, which I want to talk to as well. So indigenous people are not just stakeholders in biodiversity conservation. They are leaders, scientists, and caretakers of ecosystems that sustain life. Recognizing our rights, knowledge, and governance systems is one of the most effective ways to protect biodiversity and address climate change. I want to talk about buffalo. In Colorado, and I've been a part of discussions like this, there is a continuing movement to bring back buffalo to the land. Why does that matter? We know that buffalo is a keystone species. We know that it works to restore grassland health and regeneration. It helps improve the soils. It supports other wildlife and restores ecological balance. We as tribal nations have been promoting the importance of buffalo as climate resilience or climate mitigation strategies. We know the cultural and indigenous significance of buffalo because of when the buffalo returns, American Indian people return. When the buffalo is strong, indigenous people are strong. We see that reciprocity in indigenous and in particular Lakota life ways. It's very important that we do that. The third topic I want to raise and just bring awareness to it is the new handbook developed at the Department of Interior, Procedures for Inclusion and Application of Indigenous Knowledge in the Actions of the Federal Government. I was part of something they call SMEs, subject matter experts, and we were able then to bring forward our ideas and our thoughts and our cultures to this whole process of developing a handbook and training for the Department of Interior employees. And so that is done, that is completed. And so we have a handbook, we have a document now for public dispersal, and I hope that you can read it. I hope that can be part of the work you do when it comes to understanding TEK. I also want to share again, as I think about this idea that what are the solutions? And so because of the opportunities I've been given, I'm part of a team that's hosting what I call the first ever Economic Future Summit, investing in Indigenous sustainability solutions. So we say the world needs to create solutions for a livable climate, resilient communities and economies, and a thriving planet. Indigenous people know and apply many of these solutions and are eager to partner to innovate many more. As conservation and climate finance options rapidly evolve and billions are invested in seeking solutions, Indigenous people are seldom engaged. Why and how do we change that? Many Indigenous communities are not aware of the full range of finance opportunities that exist and how to access them. Many investors are not connected to Indigenous communities with ideas and solutions. And Indigenous leadership on economics and finance ideas are altogether missing from new investment models. So we propose an Economic Future Summit, which will be a 2.5-day Indigenous-led summit to galvanize leadership and create new paths for evolving the economy and confronting climate and nature losses. Hosted in Turtle Island in the Silicon Valley area and open to the world. This summit will convene Indigenous people with other climate and conservation investors, academics, policymakers, and practitioners to drive action. So we plan to host this summit this year in the fall, and I'll definitely invite the defenders of wildlife to be part of the summit. I also invite you as practitioners and leaders within the conservation movement to join us with this first ever summit and to see what we can do together. So with that, I want to say, Wopila Tonka Chichipolo, thank you all very much for listening to me. Back to you.
Thank you, James. As always, you're involved in quite an array of exciting projects. I look forward to hearing more about the Economic Futures Summit, and thank you for sharing some of these with us. All right, next it's my honor to introduce Dr. Barry Noon. Barry is an emeritus professor in the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology at Colorado State University. He graduated from Princeton University in 1971 with a bachelor's degree in biology, and from the State University of New York, Albany in 1977 with a PhD in ecology. In collaboration with many outstanding students and postdocs, he has conducted research on the effects of land management practices on fish and wildlife populations for the past 45 years. His focus has primarily been on the conservation of imperiled vertebrate species in aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. During this period, he has published over 160 scientific papers and co-authored 4 book-length reports to the federal government on the sustainable management of public lands. For 11 years, he directed a Forest Service research lab in the Pacific Northwest, and in 1995 served in Washington, D.C. as chief scientist of the National Biological Service, Department of the Interior. He was a professor of wildlife ecology at Colorado State University for 22 years. Dr. Noon has received numerous awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award from Defenders of Wildlife, 2 Senior Fulbright Fellowships to India from the U.S. State Department, an Aldo Leopold Leadership Fellow, and a Distinguished Ecologist Award from CSU. In collaboration with his students, his current research focuses on tiger conservation in India, climate change effects in wetland birds, water management to sustain imperiled fish, and promoting biodiversity conservation on U.S. federal lands. Barry. Just the green button to go
Is
forward.
that how I advance it? Let's see, I have a loud voice. Can people hear me? I usually don't need a mic. I don't look that young anymore. That was taken before a 6-year fight, still ongoing, with cancer, which ages you really quickly. But nevertheless, it's more flattering of me, so that's why I put it up there. Okay, so many people cry that the house is on fire, exaggerate crises. And so we use the word crises for biodiversity crises. So is there a crisis? Well, before I jump into Colorado, I want to present some data. And the interesting thing is these are data. These are not model projections. This is the current state of the Earth. So this is the global distribution of biomass for mammals. And you notice livestock, humans, wild in the water, whales, walruses, sea lions, seals, wild on land, elephants, bison, rhinoceros. When I first looked at these data, they were made available in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, globally one of the most prestigious scientific journals. I couldn't believe that this was true. So I contacted the authors. The authors have subsequently published a 2024 paper updating these data. So this isn't a projection of species we are going to lose in the future. This is the current state of our Earth. And here it is for birds, not quite as bad. Poultry and wild birds, livestock and humans. Well, are we going to leave space for the natural world? It's already severely at risk. Now, I'm going to switch gears and talk about forests in Colorado. So we have about 23 million acres of forests. And under the Biden administration, I was working on these famous executive orders. And the executive order that I was contributing to was the National Old Growth Amendment. It was a mapping of old growth and then an assessment. My role was not in the mapping, though I communicated regularly with the mapping team that was unbelievably competent. By the way, if you go up and you look for those data today, they're gone. All taken off, including all the maps. So I'm going to have a little preview of the maps. So what is the state of our forests? Well, let's use a little cartoon here so that we can look at the successional process of forests, starting, let's say, from a clear cut or a major fire event up through all the way up to old growth. So I'm going to focus on old growth. So how do you define old growth? Well, in the analysis that the Forest Service and BLM researchers were doing, which I think was top-notch, really, really good, they needed a criteria across the 30-plus different forest community types in the continental U.S. So they had a common metric, and that metric was to look at biomass accumulation as a function of the age of a forest. And they selected, admittedly arbitrary, kind of the peak of that biomass accumulation curve, where it reached 95%. So in an oak hickory forest in the east, you might be old growth at 90 years. In a Douglas fir forest in the Pacific Northwest, it might be 350 years. So you needed a common metric in order to define what's old growth. Now, let's look at Colorado and its forests. First of all, I want to point out land ownership. So it's really dominated by federal lands, Forest Service and the BLM. Most of it is occurring to the west of the Continental Divide. So we have an amazing inheritance here. Who knows if I can say this a year or two from now, of federal land that has many, many services to us. It has great value to our quality of life in Colorado and to the biological diversity that occupies these forests. This is just dominant forest types. So we start here with ponderosa pine at lower elevations, where we move up into lodgepole, and then eventually in the darker green, we move up into the spruce fir forest. And for all of you in here, I'm sure you spend a lot of time outdoors, you know these forest types and these transitions really well. So I want to talk about the importance of old-growth trees, both individually and collectively as what we call a stand. That's a forester's term. What the hell is a stand? Well, if you even go and chat GPT and ask what a forest stand is, you'll get a wide range. So let's talk about something that's 1,000 hectares or greater. They're keystone ecological structures. We had the term talk about keystone. That something's keystone when it has a value beyond its own measurement. So even though they may be rare, they have a value that's much greater than their rarity would suggest. Here we go. They're disproportionately important because they provide resources, niches in ecological jargon, for other species. Their large size, their structural complexity, their vertical and horizontal heterogeneity, and decadence. And of course, they have cavities, and cavities are critical. Just some views of some big old trees, and here you can really see both the vertical complexity and the horizontal complexity. That's why they're keystone structures. And collectively as an ecosystem, they have really emergent keystone properties. And decadence, a snag, and an occupier, a screech owl in this case, in a cavity in an old-growth tree. So, importance of old growth. Well, at the tree scale, the largest trees, old growth, represent just about 1% of the forest systems, but they sustain 40% of the above-ground carbon. Stand scale. Again, I'm going to focus here on carbon sequestration. So, how much carbon is sequestered in forests in Colorado? Well, enough, and I had to go back to the literature on this like I did for those initial graphs. Enough carbon is sequestered in Colorado forests to account for 1.7 billion automobiles and trucks, what their emissions are. That's what's stored. Watershed scale. Old-growth forests are critically important for the hydrological cycle in order to conserve water for the driest periods, and then it slowly disperses, as well as all the moisture that they sustain within the woody biomass. And the landscape scale. Fire refugia. I need to speed up. Sorry about that, I get carried away when I do this stuff. So, they are fire resistant. Two easy reasons. The moisture that's stored and the fact the limbs are up high, so the flames typically don't go up into the canopy and have canopy forests, fires. Now, this is one of the maps. This is from the Wilderness Society. You can still see this map. Blue is old growth. Notice there's not much blue. Now, I want to just give you some data, and then I'm ending very quickly. This is the distribution by age class along that successional map that I showed you. And let's just look at the far right, old growth. This is for ponderosa pine. This is for lodgepole. And this is for spruce fir. Old growth is extremely rare in Colorado. Take home message. Big old trees are important. And this probably won't happen anymore. There should be a moratorium on the cutting of all big trees. All big trees. And reduce harvesting of mature forests in order to have younger age forests grow and compensate for loss and mortality and increase the amount of old growth forest. I'm done.
Thank you, Barry. You make it very easy to get lost in it with you. All right, let's see if I can get this to go. Okay. Next, we have Dr. Anna Davidson. Dr. Davidson is a research scientist at the Colorado Natural Heritage Program at Colorado State University and a joint faculty member in the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology at CSU. Her research centers broadly on the ecology and conservation of biological diversity in the context of global change and spans multiple scales from local scale community ecology and landscape ecology to global scale macroecology. Her field research often focuses on species that play large and important ecological roles that shape and transform ecosystems such as burrowing rodents and large mammalian herbivores and are central to the conservation of associated species. A major focus of her current work is on the conservation of North America's central grasslands, one of the most imperiled ecosystems in the world. Dr. Davidson. Just the green button.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for including me in this event. It's an honor to be here and really amazing to be here with Barry and James and all of you. So I'm going to focus on some of the grassland work that I've been doing. We often don't think of our grasslands, probably most of you do. I'm imagining most of you here are aware of how amazing our grasslands once were. But just to reiterate that our grassland landscapes throughout central North America were once the Serengeti of North America. They were the mecca for biodiversity for much of North America's landscapes. Today, they're largely a domesticated landscape that has an underappreciation by the general public and has been underprotected overall. And so both Barry and I have spent time in the redwood forest working on the West Coast, but I've come to this part of the world because to help fight for the underdog, this undersystem. So with that said, can I stand over here? Can you guys hear me okay if I do this? Because this feels slightly awkward for me. Okay, good. So that is what I'm going to focus on. I work for the Colorado Natural Heritage Program at CSU, and I'm also a joint faculty member in the Fish, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology at CSU. But I'm going to be talking about kind of range-wide the central grasslands, but keeping in mind pretty much everything I talk about is very relevant to Colorado. A lot of what I'm focusing on these days and in my past has been on prairie dogs, the ultimate underdog. Prairie dogs are a keystone species. Probably many of you know this already, but here's a little diagram illustrating their ecological roles. The reason they play a keystone role is because of their burrowing. They create these deep, extensive burrows in grassland landscapes. And if you think about it, what other habitat structure really is there in these grasslands besides these deep burrow systems? This three-dimensional structure below ground. It provides habitat for all kinds of animals, from predators to arthropods to rodents and rabbits and so on. Everybody lives in those burrows, in the grasslands. They also clip vegetation, and by clipping that vegetation to see predators better, that helps to open up the landscape, creating an open grassland that animals like the mountain plover prefer. And that clipping and consumption of grass, it stimulates nutrient uptake, and it gets rid of the older leaves, and so therefore the plants have higher nutrient quality and lower leaf age, so that attracts large herbivores like bison and cattle to their colonies because of that greater nutritional value. And then by clipping and consuming grass, it helps to promote or ultimately results in a greater abundance of flowering plants, which attracts all kinds of pollinators to their colonies. It's amazing. There's research done here in Colorado showing the abundance and biodiversity is much higher for pollinators on prairie dog colonies compared to off. It's really impressive. And then, of course, prairie dogs, being these abundant rodents in this centralized patch on the landscape, provide this great food resource for all kinds of predators. And that includes North America's most endangered mammal, the black-footed ferret. And so, because of this keystone role in the grasslands, a lot of our conservation efforts center on protecting prairie dog. If we protect the prairie dog, we're protecting a whole ecosystem and many of the animals associated with them. And this is just a little visual to kind of get a sense of the system that the animals that associate above and below ground on their colonies. And this diagram shows the islands of colony habitat, these open grassland landscapes within the sea of grass. And because prairie dogs play this really fundamental role, I really appreciate this quote by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They state in their black-footed ferret recovery plan, "We believe the single most feasible action that would benefit the black-footed ferret recovery is to improve prairie dog conservation." So, with that, my colleagues and I have been very focused on how do we protect the prairie dog ecosystem. It's not just simply about the prairie dogs, right? And we just published this paper, it just came out in January, very recently, identifying the potential landscapes, the landscapes across the central grasslands that have the greatest potential for conservation. And these are the nutshells of our results. Can I walk over here? I think you guys can hear me, huh? Over here, what you're looking at are the top 10, 30% of habitat grasslands that have the greatest potential. So what this means is, so the yellow are the top 30% of grasslands that have the greatest potential for conservation. And then the hot pink shows the top 10%. And this is considering the ecological landscape that's most suitable for the prairie dog ecosystem, the threat landscape, so oil and gas drilling, urban landscapes, human activities, the cultural, political, and social landscape, and combining all that together, this is the outcome that we come up with. And then here we overlap that with land ownership so we can help guide conservation on the ground. So you're seeing, like, for example, the hot pink represents private land, the green represents federal, blue represents state, and so on. And over here, what you're seeing are our hotspots that we've identified for the black-tailed prairie dog ecosystem, but then overlapping with the outline of green and black polygons shows how the prairie dog ecosystem hotspots overlap with conservation hotspots for identified by other researchers, including Pulu Punjabi and Comer et al. they base their assessments on grassland birds and other groups, and just general biodiversity. And so what's really of interest to a lot of us working in conservation planning is how can we take these maps that identify these landscapes with great conservation potential for the prairie dog ecosystem, for bison, migratory pathways for elk and pronghorn, grassland birds, and other key umbrella and keystone species, and overlap them, essentially. And that's part of what we've done here, and it would be really nice to see this combined with other efforts, like bison, for example. I think that's what I want to mention about this. And the main points here that I want to mention is that all this data is available, downloadable, it's all on Data Drive, as well as through the Colorado Natural Heritage Program. You guys can download all the data sources, the maps used to make our maps, and then also our maps down to 90-meter resolution. You can zoom in. The idea is that in Colorado, for example, it can help guide these areas that we might want to focus on. In Colorado, I'll show here, what we're wanting to do is identify these key regions throughout the range that have the highest conservation potential and really focus in on them. This is where we're going to next, is implementing on the ground. And notice in southeastern Colorado, it's a huge hotspot. Southeastern Colorado has one of the most intact grasslands left in the central grasslands. There's also a lot of promise in very northern New Mexico and even very northern Colorado. So Colorado is a hotspot. And the main takeaway here is that I'm working with a whole team of wonderful humans, and that includes the Great Plains Conservation Network's Prairie Dog Working Group. We're all working together and this is all part of Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Grasslands Initiative to implement conservation efforts on the ground, especially in these poor regions. We need funding, conservation incentives. We want to help create grass banks that can support coexistence. There's a ton of stuff we want to be able to do to actually realize this stuff on the ground. It's my retirement goal. So let's see. So the next thing, it depends on how much time I have to talk. If I don't have much time, I'll just give you a quick nutshell about this. Wrap it up? Okay, so finally, what I want to just mention here is plague. Many of you guys have probably heard about plague, and it is devastating the populations of prairie dogs and associated species. And my colleagues and I are in the process of identifying plague-resistant genes in prairie dogs across their range. And it's just some super exciting, cool work. It's in collaboration with Lauren Casson-Sackett, who got her degree here at University of Colorado Boulder, and Tony Roque, who's at the National Wildlife Health Center. I think my big nutshell is we're collecting tissue samples from museum specimens and contemporary samples to be able to look at the trajectory of plague resistance across the range of prairie dogs, because right now we're just using insecticides to essentially control the impacts of plague. And so we're trying to understand immunity and how conservation can maybe come in and address some of that. Wonderful groups of people that play all kinds of important roles in this work. This is an NSF-funded project. And then finally, I want to just say that, I don't know how to go back, but I want to underscore Colorado Natural Heritage Program. This is, thank you. We're here focused on Colorado, so it's really relevant to underscore the role of the Colorado Natural Heritage Program at CSU. Our program plays a major role, and all of these conservation efforts
that are going on in the state of Colorado. And we essentially are heavily engaged in identifying the species, where they're at, what their needs are, what their conservation status is, and how we can use that information for conservation planning on the ground. And here's one little example, one of many examples of what we're doing. This is not my work, but shows the connectivity and greatest potential of habitats for the state of Colorado. This is some fresh work by my colleagues at CNHP. The blue is showing some of the areas that have the highest conservation potential. And this is going to be a dashboard that's going to be available to all of you, to policymakers and conservation practitioners and everybody else. I think those are my main points. If anybody has questions at some point, I'll be happy to chat about them. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, and we appreciate all of that data because we don't know where or how to conserve it if we don't know where it lives. So very important work. All right. All right. Next, I'm happy to introduce Representative Alex Valdez. Representative Valdez represents House District 5, which encompasses downtown Denver, as well as one of the most polluted zip codes in the country. Prior to serving in the Colorado legislature, Alex founded one of Colorado's largest solar companies. In the Colorado House of Representatives, he is chair of the Energy and Environment Committee. As a member of the Latino Caucus and member of the LGBTQ Caucus, Representative Valdez is proud to bring representation to the State House and work amongst a diverse cohort of legislators. Since being elected, he has authored and passed laws to bolster Colorado's community solar garden industry, protect the public from air toxic emissions, improve the state's mechanisms for dealing with cases of animal cruelty, and phase out single-use plastic bags and styrofoam products. Representative Valdez, in case you need it, green button.
Thank you. I can project as well. Thanks for having me. My name is Alex Valdez. I am the representative for House District 5. This used to be House District 5 until we did redistricting. Now it's just across the street, so it's this urban district. I've been in the ledge now 7 years, and I've been a board member with NCEL for many years as well. So environmental causes are obviously my primary work. So this was, what I want to put here is we did a biodiversity trade. I think what happened was we were really looking to try and find some piece of legislation that we could run in Colorado that would help us deal with this biodiversity crisis, right? And my basis for the biodiversity crisis really came from a couple of things. Number one, just reading articles over the years about how we are depleting all of the living things around us pretty much in every way that we can. And then I think I got really amped up to get back to work on this subject when I read that since 1970, about 70% of all the animals on the earth have gone. They've been killed by us. So that's 70% of life other than us. That's what makes it important, the impact that we're having. So we were only able to attribute, and I'll tell you guys, it's really funny, the majority there did not want me to do this tribute. So we just kind of had to do it without permission, I guess you would say, which is kind of sad. It's not the case anymore that that's the way we do it, but yeah. So you can see here we have lots of different species of bees and butterflies and hummingbirds, but 20% of our species are at risk. We can talk about biodiversity stuff all day. Given what the damage that we've already done, how much more damage can we afford to do is the question. We think zero, and every time I watch the news, they talk about somebody moved to the mountains and then a bear came to their house and ate their trash and shot the bear. I think we still have a lot of work to go until we understand what our role in biodiversity is. That said, I'm a city person, and we don't have bears down here. We're hoping to keep it that way. So what have we done? We've been working on just a variety of different issues when it comes to biodiversity, and I think that we've selected some of the things that we've worked on over the past few years at the Colorado Legislature. So the invertebrates and rare plants wildlife commission. So as you can see there, it adds rare plants and invertebrates to the list that can be studied under the Endangered, Threatened Wildlife and Rare Plant Conservation Act. So it helps us have more resources to get the data that we need to create laws that might help us to actually stop and then maybe someday reverse the issue that we find ourselves in. Safe crossings, we were a really an early adopter of this. They're done. You can actually see them as you drive up I-70 at this point. There are safe wildlife corridors, and they are already yielding the reward of not having cars making impacts with migrating populations. And it's my suspicion that wolves are using that crossover as well to avoid the traffic on I-70. So that's interesting. And then regulate and dredge and fill activities. This is a great example of what we're probably going to end up having to do over the next few years as we see the Trump administration roll back protections that we've built over the years. This is a great example of how a state can do that. So the protections for wetland dredging were removed, and we put it back into place so that it would still be enforced here in Colorado. So that's the beauty of our system, is that while the federal government can go kind of crazy, we can get our stuff together and actually put the things that they already showed us the path on how to do back into law. So that's that. What do we have going on? Well, we are still working on our strategy under a really constrained budgetary environment. We are at a point this year where we're expected to cut about $1 billion from our budget. So it's amazing that we're able to still continue this work, but that just shows that to so many people in my caucus, it's such an important thing that we continue to work on. So we're protecting wild bison. It would make hunting or taking wild bison illegal unless the commission gives permission, and that may be for a sick animal or something like that, but we really don't want to have our wild bison be the next target of hunters that come from all over the world and all over the United States to make our fauna disappear. We don't want that. And the detection components for wildlife mitigation, I think it's supposed to say migration, maybe not. Mitigation. Okay, so wildfire detection. Obviously, it's important. It doesn't help wildlife when we do have fires, and we still have significant risk for wildfire, given the fact that we still have the beetle kill wood and some other issues that we haven't really managed our forestry, our stuff very well. So what we're doing with this bill is establishing a cash fund to help improve detection. So there's systems they can put in now. They used to have people that would look out, but they're getting digital now. And we're going to be monitoring so we can catch these things early and put them out before they become massive fires that really wipe out whole ecosystems and areas of the state. Well, there you go. I don't know.
Forgot the Wolverine.
The Wolverine. Oh yeah, is that a thing we're about to? There's a lot of stuff coming. And in other words, I think at the end of the day, what is important to take away from the work that's being done at the Capitol is that we are aware of the problem. It's a massive one, not one that any individual state can solve. But the beauty of Colorado is that we have a majority of people who believe, yes, we have a problem, and yes, we need to continue to do little bits of work that are going to contribute to this overall future, where we may no longer be a part of the problem, but may have built the solutions to those problems. I think that's kind of where I've been at in my career. And so, yeah, and this is just the start. We still need to fund things. We still need to improve wildlife corridors and expand them to new areas of the state where we have other populations of species that we're really worried about. That's something that CDOT is doing every day. But yeah, so that kind of covers what we're doing. I mean, I could answer a few questions. Would you like me to answer questions? Yeah. Questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
you can take one question while we wait for Congressman to.
That sounds good. As soon as he gets here, I'll turn it over to him
All right.
if you want me to just roll with it. Anyone have a question for me except for Ian? I'm just kidding. How about we start with our Yes, ma'am.
Talking about like what states can do given like pullback at the federal level, given that we're likely to see more energy development on federal lands and potentially within Colorado, what can the state do to make sure that it's going to happen what can the state do to make sure that that development happens with as little impact as possible?
Yeah, it's a good question. I keep coming to this impasse. I wasn't serious. I want you to stay and ask questions. Okay, we'll see that. Have fun. We see each other every day down at the Capitol. I'm very active in this, but it's very hard because we're trying to decipher this for the first time, how we're going to react as a state to what is essentially a hostile federal government to the policies that we've passed. Normally, we've had federal governments that work with our regulatory agencies, so that even if they did expansions of oil and gas, or they would go through our regulatory structure and follow our rules. I don't think they're going to follow our rules anymore. So I think that to some degree, what happens on federal lands is beyond our control. We kind of lost that ability. But anyway, I see somebody much more important than myself has arrived. So yeah, I'll let you introduce the congressman, but I'm happy to take any questions. I saw some other hands, but I'll take them after the fact. I don't want to keep you guys on schedule. I'm sure you've had a long day. Thank you for having me. Feel free to reach out to our office at any time if you have ideas on how we can do better, like the forestry stuff. I'm always looking to learn new things that can help with. And so thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, and next, certainly not least, as many of you know, Congressman Joe Neguse represents Colorado's 2nd District in the U.S. House of Representatives. He is a senior member of the Democratic leadership in the House and has served as Assistant Minority Leader since March 2024. He is a member of the Judiciary Committee and was appointed by House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries to serve on the prestigious Rules Committee. We at Defenders of Wildlife know him best through his work as a member of the House Natural Resources Committee, where he serves as ranking member on the House Subcommittee on Federal Lands, and for his national leadership on biodiversity. Throughout the Biden administration, Representative Neguse championed a widely supported bipartisan resolution calling for the president to take comprehensive policy action to address the biodiversity crisis through the establishment of a national biodiversity strategy. The congressman is a leader who recognizes the magnitude of the challenge biodiversity faces and the need for bold, comprehensive actions. So with that, please, Congressman.
Oh, great. I have no slides, but I thank you for, for the opportunity. Good evening. It's good to see all of you. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to come by and say a few words. And I know you've already benefited from hearing a number of distinguished professors whom, of course, call the 2nd Congressional District home, and the wonderful state representative whom you just heard from, Alex Valdez, who has a particular view that I think is enhanced by virtue of working in the renewable energy space, which I trust that he talked a bit about. It is a special opportunity for me to be able to come by and just share with you my thoughts and ruminations, perhaps, on what is happening in Washington, D.C., and the work that you all are doing, which couldn't be more important, and this convening couldn't be happening at a more important time. I also think it's important for me to level with you and to be honest about the threats to biodiversity that I think will only become more pronounced over the months and years ahead. Because, of course, as was mentioned, I've had the privilege of representing the 2nd Congressional District, which I believe is the most beautiful congressional district in the United States of America. I don't know if anyone here lives in the 2nd District, but anyone here live in Boulder or Fort Collins? Or okay, well, the rest of you are welcome to move, and I'm happy to, would love to represent you. But the last 6 years, so much of our work has been prospective in nature, altruistic in nature, in some respects sort of conversations around what we can do, right? In particular, during the course of the Biden presidency. And while there are certainly things that I would have liked to have seen achieved during the course of the last 4 years, we made a lot of progress, a great deal of progress, in no small part due to the activism and the engagement of folks like yourselves. It is, of course, as a result, very sobering to find ourselves today in February of 2025, when just a mere 48 hours ago, you had one particular agency attempt to promulgate the repeal of every single NEPA regulation that has governed the application of that statute, right? And so we find ourselves at a very difficult time traversing this struggle between, of course, wanting to achieve everything we'd like to achieve regarding biodiversity, while simultaneously being forced and compelled to fight to defend every inch of progress that we've made in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years, which I think it's important for us to be clear-eyed about. I know this is not a partisan event, but again, every single law, every single regulation, every single administrative agency action that purports to protect biodiversity is on the chopping block. And if we are not clear-eyed about that and strategic as to how we respond, I fear that the losses will be generational in scope. And it will be very difficult for us, inevitably, when majorities come, majorities go, and the political winds will shift in Washington. But when we are given an opportunity to govern again, will it be too late? And that is certainly what's on my mind. I suspect it's on the minds of many of all of you. I found a quote that I think speaks to this so well, and it's a quote from a Republican, a former Republican president, who once said the following, and as you can tell, I'm getting blind with Congress is aging me rapidly, so I wore my glasses today. So he convened a conference, and at this conference he said the following: "This conference is called to consider the weightiest problem now before the nation. And the occasion for the meeting lies in the fact that the natural resources of our country are in danger of exhaustion if we permit the old wasteful methods of exploiting them longer to continue." That was from President Teddy Roosevelt at a national convening that he had assembled in 1908, 100 years ago. I think we have some work to do as we debate the understatement of the day. I think we have some work to do in how we talk about biodiversity and how we make the case to Americans who may have a different worldview than our own, but who fundamentally care about protecting the lands, the treasured public spaces, the biodiversity that we are blessed to share this planet with. And that is a challenge that every single one of us will have to embrace over the coming months, because if we do that successfully, and if we win in the court of public opinion, we may very well be able to avert some of those regulatory rollbacks that I described. There will be plenty of legal battles in federal and state court. Those have already been initiated. They will develop. Those will be adjudicated. But if we don't win in the court of public opinion, I fear we won't be able to win those legislative battles, which are coming. And so that's certainly part of my focus. And I, as I have always, will lean on insight from folks like yourselves who've committed their careers to this work to help inform how we approach those strategic conversations with our colleagues, with our neighbors, with our fellow citizens. And I think if we do that, we can ensure that the gains that were made over the last 4 years are not lost. So I thank you for the work that you've done, but more importantly, I thank you for the work that I know you're going to be doing in the days and the weeks and the months and the years ahead. Won't be easy, but we'll get through it together. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, but more than anything else, thank you for inviting me to come say a few words. I appreciate it. I don't know if you'd like me to answer a question or two, or?
Yeah, actually, we can open it up to questions to any of the panelists. I think we have a microphone somewhere if someone would like to, or you can just project your voice. There is another one, yes. So feel free to raise a hand and we can come around with a mic if you need it, and you're welcome to ask any of the panelists at this point questions.
What a shy group.
Yeah.
I'm not very surprised. Well, I will just say, if any of you are interested, come to Washington, D.C. We could use your help. So that's my one request of you. Obviously, right now, it's a tumultuous time in our nation's capital, and we could certainly use your support. Yes, ma'am.
Do you, in your congressional offices here in Colorado, do you have have volunteers or staff who can educate the public?
Yeah, what a great and thoughtful question. And to be candid, it's proven to be more difficult. I've served in Congress for 6 years. So I first came in 2018 during President Trump's first administration, first term as president. And the way in which the media ecosystem has just completely fractured in that intervening 6 years is mind-boggling. And it's become more and more difficult to channel a message to even just my own constituency. Of course, a big component of my responsibility is public education. That is to say, informing my constituents about what's happening in Washington, D.C., and distilling that into the direct impacts that we're experiencing here in Colorado in the context of biodiversity and our federal lands and what the land managers, by virtue of the new appointment that was made at BLM and obviously the new Interior Secretary and the like, intend to do with respect to our federal lands, which I know was a topic of conversation before I arrived. And so while we have, I do a lot of town halls. I did 2 town halls today in Netherland and in Boulder. We do mass communications via a newsletter that has 50,000 subscribers in my congressional district. We do television interviews, everything from local television to MSNBC or CNN and all the rest. But the reality is, I am not convinced that in light of the fractured media ecosystem we find ourselves in, and again, I want to be careful about how partisan I get, but social media engines that are owned by individuals who have a very different worldview than mine, that creates a real series of challenges in terms of communicating and educating the public. And I don't know that's a problem that we've quite solved. And it's not, I don't know that members of Congress are going to solve that. It's going to be something that collectively civic society is going to have to answer.
Congressman Neguse, my name is James Rowlingleaf, and I was part of this panel and also have an appointment at the University of Colorado Boulder. So technically I work in your district and you work for me.
That is true.
That's the joke.
I'm proud to work for you.
Congressman, let me introduce myself to you. I know you know my boss very well, Dr. Jennifer Bulch.
Of course.
Who's worked on many fire-related issues through the years, and I appreciate your support for our work. I just saw today in the news that the National Science Foundation laid off, 10% of its workforce. And I know, as you know, we're working hard to plan for the future. So I just want to say we appreciate your support, continued support, Congressman Neguse. My question is, I spoke a lot on my panel discussion today about the role of tribal nations in this work. As you know, we have 2 federally recognized tribes in the southwest of Colorado. And also, as a Lakota person from South Dakota, we also have ancestral homeland connections to Colorado as well. And one of the things that I think is important to raise is really, again, is the importance of tribal nations and in terms of this work going forward, in terms of biodiversity loss, climate change, and those solutions we talk about. So I want to hear what you think about that in terms of going forward, in terms of tribal nations work in Colorado, but also in the West. My second part to relate to that is the role of bison or buffalo. I had the great honor last year to represent the university at our Hill visits in February, and I'm sorry I did not get to meet you, but I did meet some of your staff. And when the role of bison restoration, when that topic came up in our conversations, boy, all the congressional districts perked up, meaning that they're very interested in this whole area of bison restoration. So I would love for us to come together as county, local, tribal universities and such to host a summit where we can begin to chart out the future. You mentioned Teddy Roosevelt talking at a meeting. I think one thing that I would love to hear your thoughts on is convening a summit to bring their leaderships together and host it in your district at the university, and to bring together tribes and all those who care about the future of bison in the West. And what can we do together to advance that? So I'll stop there. And again, thank you for coming, and I appreciate the question. I can answer you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My staff does that when they're trying to shut down a question that they don't want me to answer. Exactly. Appreciate that. Very subtle. Professor, it's good to see you, and you're right that I certainly do work for you and not the other way around, and it's a privilege. And leave it to a CU professor to bring up buffalo restoration. And I'm a former CU buff. I went to law school and undergrad at CU Boulder, so I say that in jest. But certainly supportive of your efforts. I think your idea about convening a summit is a great one. We did something similar in my congressional office 3 years ago in the aftermath of the Marshall Fire. Convened a wildfire summit, brought together a lot of experts. Some of you may have participated in it, folks within the Forest Service and a variety of different officials, including both of our senators. And it was a great opportunity to kind of to spur conversations about forest restoration and some other issues pertinent to that particular discussion. I think your idea regarding a summit is a great one, and so we'll take that back to my team. With respect to tribal nations, of course, couldn't agree with you more. We work closely, notwithstanding that the Southern Ute and Ute Mountain Ute are not in my congressional district, but we work very closely with both tribes, going back to when I used to run our state's regulatory department, including the Civil Rights Division. And so have a long-standing relationship with both tribes. And, we had a Secretary of the Interior in Deb Haaland, who was a dear friend of mine, a former colleague, still a dear friend, who I think, of course, took tribal engagement very seriously. Time will tell. Open question what that will look like now under the new Department of Interior administration. Finally, I will just say, it's a good note to close on. My hearts go out, and we're talking every single day, to individuals who are at the NSF, at NIH, at NCAR, at UCAR, at NOAA, at NIST, at CIRA, at every single one of these incredible federal labs, research institutions, facilities that have done incredible work in service to our country that are now being gutted piece by piece and dismantled. And I can just assure you that there are still those of us in Washington who believe in the propriety of the work that these folks do every day, in the value that they bring to the table, and that we're going to use every legislative tool available to us to try to stop it. And that's the work we are engaged in, and that work will continue. So thank you, Professor. Thank all of you for sticking around and letting me share my thoughts, and I'll defer to the rest of the panel for the tougher questions. But thanks so much. Appreciate it.
And the topic was on conservation finance. And there's the public, and then there's the public as in government institutions, and then there's businesses. And given that there is a pullback from sort of the public, the federal government, like how do we engage businesses to help with, I guess, this biodiversity challenge? I think that Indigenous peoples haven't been traditionally included in conservation finance. And I'd be really curious to hear like what people are doing to use conservation finance in Colorado as a solution to the issues that you all are talking about.
With colleagues was, in terms of Colorado issues, actively involved in promoting the reintroduction of wolves. So during that time, I went around and gave talks at a number of county commissioners. Those were often hostile interactions, but I'm a former spotted owl biologist, so I'm used to that. I also unsuccessfully tried to get a prohibition on hunting of bobcats and mountain lions, both from a scientific and from a humanitarian perspective. And there was a movement, and I've made, along with a colleague at UC, Johanna Lambert, who's absolutely fantastic, we have regularly made written and oral testimony to the Wildlife Commission on a variety of issues. I just wish there were more scientists who stepped out of the ivory tower and communicated their science and were more engaged in contributing to policy development. It's still rare, very rare.
Well, I'm glad to hear the question. I don't have an answer per se, but I know that, again, I mentioned the summit that we're convening this fall in Silicon Valley, San Francisco area, where really what we want to do is bring together the leading indigenous thinkers, practitioners from what we call Turtle Island, which is Canada, America, and Mexico, to come together with the purpose again of understanding what is happening in these areas again around this issue of conservation financing. What are the models and what are the things that we can learn from? Also, I mentioned the fact that we are working diligently to bring together investors. Who are those organizations that are willing to look at another way to do this work more equitably with Indigenous people? And so the Canadian First Nations and such, they have, I think, many opportunities to develop another way to finance and support the work in terms of conservation. And so we're really excited to do this event, and we hope that we get a good delegation from Colorado to come. And again, as I said, you're invited, and more information to come as far as the final date and venue and registration, all those good things. But again, I think it's a timely topic. We're also working with the Native Americans in philanthropy. Again, that's an emerging group that works at the interface between philanthropy and tribal nations. And so it is our hope that they will serve as an important guide for us. I'm new to the philanthropy world, and I hope that because of the challenge we face in federal funding now and other areas, that there will be opportunities for us to learn and grow and co-develop opportunities with tribal nations and the private sector. So more to come, and thank you for the question. Stay tuned.
Sorry. I have another suggestion.
Yeah.
I mean, the people here are obviously here because the environment and the natural world is really important to their quality of life. So one of the things that I started a few years ago is to work more locally. So I'm on an advisory board to the City Council and Mayor of Fort Collins, and I'm on an advisory board to the Larimer County Commissioners. And I've been doing those for a number of years. And I try to make my arguments science-based, evidence-based, not just my opinion, but that there's data that suggests these different perspectives. I've also been active in some lawsuits to stop diversion to conserve rivers. I love to fly fish, and I used to be a whitewater boater when I was younger. And so I'm involved in some lawsuits to try to stop dams being built and water diversions for like the city of Portland and things like that. So given these bad times federally and how I think all of us are feeling powerless, that's something. And for instance, in our committee in the city, we're trying to recruit people to our board, and it's surprising in a city like Fort Collins, which is very environmentally focused, and how difficult it is to get people to apply, be a board member, and contribute their ideas. So that makes me feel a little bit less powerless by having those local engagements.
Thanks for the plug. I have, I guess if there's no others, I'll round out with a final question maybe that each of the panelists could answer. And that is, you make the good point, Barry, that a lot of the folks in the room are maybe feel as you and I do about biodiversity and about taking action for it. What is it that you would like your fellow Coloradans that maybe aren't in this room to know about biodiversity and what's going on here in Colorado?
Do you want me to respond?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for the question. For me, again, I'm going to look at this question and response through my affiliation with the University of Colorado Boulder. So I began my work as they call it research associate, and I appreciate the promotion I got from Congressman Nagoose. So he made me a professor just like that, and I appreciate that. I began my work about half-time at the university, and I was first hired to help advise and liaison between Tribal Nations and the North Central Climatization Science Center at Boulder. It's a brand new center there. And so it was there that I began my work there, working and developing relationships with the university, the researchers and faculty and students. And it was there that we began to consider the opportunity of working in the Northern Great Plains with tribes and tribal college and universities. So I want to make a plug for the importance of tribal colleges and universities, the 35 tribal colleges that are spread out across this country, and a majority of them are in the Northern Great Plains, and majority of them could use support and could use advocacy. So I want one the takeaway for me is explore and better understand tribal college universities. That's number one. Number two, we saw data today, right? All our work is supported by data. And so we began at the University of Colorado Boulder through the EASL program, the Environmental Science Innovation Inclusion Lab, a $22 million data synthesis center, where again I serve as a tribal advisor leader on that, is to really understand what is and what should be a tribal data workforce initiative. So we've been working with tribal colleges, Oglala Lakota College on a Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and United Tribes Technical College. And it's there that we're beginning to map out what a curriculum would look like, what a partnership would look like in terms of attracting tribal college students to come and work with us at CU, and also to begin to understand the role of data. The data revolution, a lot of times the data revolution is past Indian country. We're left out. And so we have a lot of work to make up, a lot of time. But I'm really glad that, and really thankful for the university, the leadership there of getting behind this tribal data workforce initiative. And I think that's important because we know that these skills are needed to do conservation work, to hire early career scientists and people who want to work and understand data. I would love to talk to Congressman Nagoose about this winning the hearts of the communities in terms of how we work today the next 4 years or so, not to maybe to change minds, but to create better understanding. My work at the university is to really create an atmosphere for understanding tribal nations better and more effectively. We know there's a lot of work going on. There's a history there. And I'm trying to, strengthen that bridge and to address those issues that sit in a gap of understanding between us. That's why I began my remarks the way I did, because it's a reminder again to all of us about who we are as Indian people and that we're still in Colorado. I'm reminding ourselves again today that at times in the year, the Front Range of Colorado has the most diverse Indian population in the country. And my challenge to the University of Colorado Boulder is how do we make that, how do we deal with that, but also how do we support that in terms of those cultures coming together really to advance what's important in terms of science, data, traditional knowledge, all those things that we've talked about tonight. And again, it's my hope that we make progress there. And my last point will be is that we just hired a new vice chancellor for sustainability. He's going to start in the first week of March. And so our university is committed to sustainability. And I got to be on the search committee for that position. And it was important for me that whoever was hired, even though they didn't have direct experience working with tribal nation, indigenous people, they would be open to that. They'd be willing to listen and to learn of how we do this work together going forward. So I can see through the work at CU Boulder and the new Office of Sustainability that we can develop an agenda in terms of looking at the future. And that's why I raised the question with buffalo and bison and all those things that are important to not only indigenous people, but to others. As I learned to do this work together and to be part of things like the defenders, there needs to be voices there needs to be articulation about these ideas. And so going before the public, working with the public is important. And so I wanted to share those with you tonight. I have to go now and sign off, but I want to thank Defenders for this opportunity. Thank you as participants and the audience for listening. And that hopefully that as the great Chief Sitting Bull said, let us put our minds together to see what we can do for our children. So thank you very much. Wopila Tanka Chichapalo. Thank you all very much, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
I will, so you guys can hear me a lot better, but talking about biodiversity here in the state of Colorado, and what message we want to get across, I think there's two things. One, I just wanted to reiterate what we're talking about with regards to what this new landscape means for us. Like, it's not my talk, right? I'm like, we're going to do all of this. Those ideas were pre-January 2025. So we have these big visions and we want to do these things, but part of my NSF project that I just talked about, that just the other day, I had to write that I will not, let me back up. I received funding, federal funding, to hire a Native American student specifically to participate on our NSF project. I had to write that I am not going to focus the ad for Native American students. No, they can certainly apply. But this kind of leads me to what the solution is. Well, fortunately, the Colorado Natural Heritage Program receives a lot of private funds and not a lot of private, but it's independent from federal. I think I misspoke how I said that, but the Colorado Natural Heritage Program gets independent funds for our training of students, private donors, and then we also get a lot of state funds. So it's not limited to federal funds. So we are going to make sure that we hire Native American students. It just won't be from the same pool of funding. So it kind of goes back to what Barry's talking about, is in this time right now, like, I think we're all like, what do we do and how do we do this? And I think Barry is right, like, at least, and I'm sure you guys all have so many great ideas to contribute here, but at the very least, we should be focusing local. We have an amazing community here in Colorado. I am very grateful to be here and surrounded by a lot of like-minded kindred spirits. And so when we're thinking of how we can protect and conserve our biodiversity, how can we do this within the state system? How can we go outside of the federal system right now? We're certainly fighting back, right? But acting locally and trying to encourage that local action. You saw what Barry was talking about, you saw some of my maps. There is so much here in Colorado that we still have that's really intact. It's in amazing condition in the big scheme of things. So there's still a lot of potential, there's a lot of hope, but we might just need to be going outside of the federal landscape right now, and I don't know, but that's where I kind of open it up. To tell you, it was about a week ago, I was thinking about coming, and then all this stuff has been going on, and I got sick because I was so stressed over all the news, you know? And I'm like, it's affecting all of us in different ways. I'm like, okay, but so it's always powerful to how do we channel that energy? Where do we put it? And that's why I appreciate all of us being here and thinking, especially in this landscape, how do we move forward to biodiversity conservation? That's my 2 cents.
Well said. With that, I also want to show appreciation again to our panelists today. If you do have a question and want to follow up, otherwise, for folks who want to revisit this night or share it with others. We will have this up on our defenders.org, up on our website. It is the 4th in a series of what I think is very important conversations, particularly now, to be having. So yeah, hope you will come find it or maybe attend another one someday. Thank you very much, and please enjoy the reception and the company.